G'day, I'm Eustace Black, author and all-round net fun guy. Welcome to the We Agnostics Podcast. I may not believe in religion, but I believe in you.
Welcome to episode 5. My name is Justin. I'm provisionally calling this episode The Price of History. It is an attempt to understand the seemingly ongoing dilemma of no faith, as was put by Bill Wilson in a Grapevine article in 1961. This is a dilemma that is seemingly with us still today. The price of history is the price that AA will have to pay in choosing between dogma and the second tradition. It is the price of survival. I'm not sure it's a price that AA is willing to pay. In May 2017, AA groups in my local area of the General Service structure of AA Australia, known as Area B, were asked to provide topics for the upcoming annual General Service Conference of AA Australia. Area B covers a large chunk of southeastern New South Wales, one of the most populous states in Australia. Area B sends a delegate to this conference each November. The following topic was formulated and discussed through a number of AA members, in particular the first non-religious meeting, Quad A Canberra. What is the background or reason for the topic? In May 2011, 2 agnostic AA groups were delisted by the Greater Toronto Area Intergroup of AA, known as GTAI. The groups launched a complaint against GTAI with the Greater Ontario Human Rights Tribunal on September 18, 2014. One member claimed that he and the groups, which had their own secular versions of the 12 steps, were being discriminated against based on religious creed. GTAI lost the case and were forced to relist the meetings and list a further 10 agnostic atheist AA meetings. The AA World Service were listed as a respondent in the case and considered cutting ties with the GTAI. What are the estimated costs of implementing this suggestion? Nil. How will the alcoholic who still suffers or the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous benefit from this suggestion? The formal recognition of each group's ability to interpret the 12 steps in line with the second tradition would be of great benefit to the alcoholic who still suffers. One of the co-founders of AA, Bill Wilson, was able to recognise this as early as July 1946, when he wrote in the Grapevine, "So long as there's the slightest interest in sobriety, the most unmoral, the most antisocial, the most critical alcoholic can gather about him a few kindred spirits and announce to us that a new Alcoholics Anonymous group has been formed. Anti-God, anti-medicine, anti our own recovery program, even anti each other. These rampant individuals are still an AA group, if they think so." The quote does one thing, and it does it well. He explains the Tradition 9. AA as such ought never be organised, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. Interestingly enough, the first version of the traditions, at the time called 12 Points to Assure Our Future, were written by Bill and published in the Grapevine a few months before this quote above was shared. That article was published in April 1946. As Bill Wilson also recognised in correspondence in 1961, as time passes, our book literature has a tendency to get more and more frozen, a tendency for conversion into something like dogma. This is a trait of human nature which I am afraid we can do little about. Later that year, Bill Wilson would write another piece for the Grapevine, in which he makes amends for his, and I quote, "spiritual cocksureness, pride and aggression, which," and I quote from him again, "in AA's first years all but ruined the whole undertaking with this sort of unconscious arrogance." These are his words, not mine. This topic will also further broaden the archway through which the alcoholic must pass while coming to an understanding of Step 2. It also reaffirms Tradition 3, that there are no requirements for membership except for the desire to stop drinking. It also will allow the still suffering alcoholic to resolve some of the contradictory wording within the Big Book that expresses the spiritual but not religious dichotomy of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA literature is contradictory on the subject of this spiritual but not religious dictum, with unresolved confusion between statements like the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, and Chapter 5's religious assertion Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help it is too much for us. But there is one that has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. It would also strengthen the unity of AA in Australia and worldwide. And the big book suggestion that any business needs to take regular inventory as a fact-finding and fact-facing process, from page 64. This greater unity would allow for members to refocus on carrying the AA message. AA has had an ambiguous relationship with religion, as described above. Some alcoholics may perceive AA to be religious or quasi-religious. Some alcoholics may perceive AA to be religious or quasi-religious. They may perceive that it's not for them or only for religious people. They may feel that they're being excluded. As of 2011, between an estimated 23 to 50% of Australians consider themselves to have no religion. This percentage is even higher in young people. Rates of people abusing alcohol at a level that will put them at risk of alcohol-related disease or injury over their lifetime has remained relatively stable between 2007 and 2010 at around 20.1%, although these rates do tend to be higher in our Indigenous communities. Just note here that data that's now available is more recent than what was available at the time of writing the submission, and people who consider themselves to have no religion are now the second highest religious group in Australia. Do you have a suggested solution? Yes. Allow groups to interpret the 12 steps in line with the second edition and display alternative steps in conjunction with the steps as set out in the big book. Have you asked your group, district, or area to make a decision about this topic? And if so, what is the outcome? Alcoholics Anonymous for Agnostics and Atheists Canberra, Quad A, discussed this issue at their group conscience on the 2nd of June 2017. It was decided that the environment within AA was still too dangerous for us to openly reinterpret and display the steps for ourselves. It's important to note that it was the second part of this which was the most prominent within the group conscience, that we could interpret the steps, but we had to keep them secret. There was no way that we could display them openly. So what happened? What happened in AA or the wider society that we find ourselves in this position, feeling that in 2017 AA is a less safe place for an agnostic or an atheist in AA than was hinted at by the previous quotations from Bill Wilson in 1946 and 1961. What do we do? How will we keep faith with Bill's attempt to make amends for what happened in the early days of AA? The right to disbelief is set out in Section 116 of the Constitution of Australia, and it precludes the Commonwealth of Australia, i.e. our Federal Parliament, from making laws establishing any religion, imposing any religious observance, or prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Section 116 also provides that there will be no religious test required as qualification for any office or public trust under the Commonwealth, something that's openly flouted by our military chaplains, but that is an outside issue. While the above protection is given to religious freedom in the Australian Constitution, it's far from comprehensive. Constitutional protection is limited in a number of ways in that it only applies to the Commonwealth and does not apply to our states, who have the ability to make different laws and may not adhere to these principles. It also does not apply to all government action, but only to legislation and actions undertaken under legislation. It does not, in its terms, protect beliefs that are not religious, although our High Court has interpreted it to extend to atheism and agnosticism at least. The right of freedom of thought, conscience and religion is recognised as the Article 18 of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. This is much more comprehensive than the Australian Constitution, and it has been interpreted as such by the Australian Human Rights Commission, who observe that the freedom to have or adopt a religion or belief necessarily entails the freedom to choose a religion or belief, including the right to replace one's religious belief or religion with another, or adopt a position of having no views, as well as the right to retain a religion. So Article 18.2 bars coercion that would impair the right to have or adopt a religion, including the threat of use of physical force or penal sanctions. This is important as these protections are extended to atheists and agnostics under Australian legislation. We'll come to see, however, that these protections are not always enforced and can be very difficult to enforce within the context of anonymity within AA. There are numerous cases of this anonymity providing protection for discrimination, or at least the ability to make such discrimination and harassment covert within the AA setting. I'm aware of at least 8 cases, not including my own group's experience of listing within AA. The first of which is probably the most famous one that I mentioned of Toronto, but there is at least, as I say, numerous others, including Agnostic AA in New York, who in September 2010 was ordered by Gail SR, a GSO staffer, to remove any reference to alternative steps, as well as to remove any references to addicts from their website. LR's words to the group included, "So we respectfully request that your group stop calling itself an AA group. The modified 12 steps and any reference to addicts should be removed from your website." You can see that very quickly the use of alternative steps and group membership and belonging within AA are conflated. This is a pattern that we will see repeated across many of these examples. The other technique that is used within AA for harassment is to simply ignore requests for listing or take a very long time to list groups. Many will argue that the steps cannot be changed. In fact, AA took actions in 1957 by passing the following bylaw, which was adopted through the General Service Board, asserting the negative right of preventing, insofar as it may be within its power to do so, any modification, alteration or extension of these 12 steps, except at the instance of a Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous in keeping with the Charter of the General World Service Conference. This would require a 2/3 vote to amend any steps going through the General Service Board in alignment with the Charter. Not an easy task. The easy workaround here being simply to display the book steps and your alternative steps side by side. It's worth noting here that the author of the steps, Bill Wilson, was actually comfortable with interpretation of the steps. He saw them as adaptations in life, and he told this to some Buddhists who wanted to start AA groups in Thailand, who wished to change the word God in the steps for good. Bill wrote to them, "To some of us, the idea of substituting good for God in the 12 steps will seem like a watering down of AA's message. We must remember that AA steps are suggestions only. A belief in them as they stand is not at all a requirement for membership amongst us. This liberty has made AA available to thousands who never would have tried it at all, had we insisted on 12 steps being done as written." Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age, page 81, 1957. The tension here between the steps being suggestions only and the actions of the GTAI saying that all groups must be prepared to practice the 12 steps is key in this price of history. It seems clear that Bill Wilson and some of the early members of AA were much more flexible and much more adherent to tradition too than some of our current members. But as already noted, this was a tendency towards dogma that Bill was well aware of. The second group that I'm aware of that has come into trouble with AA for being non-religious is the Indianapolis We Agnostics group. This group was founded on the 1st of November 2009. A letter dated the 3rd of November 2010, which was on the group's first anniversary, signed by the Indianapolis Intergroup manager, told the group that because they read a changed version of the 12 steps, that it was the judgment of the Indianapolis Intergroup's Service Committee that their group no longer belonged in AA. The authors of the letter go on to explain the reason for their delisting, saying, "Early in the Big Book, our founders made it clear that we alcoholics suffer from a disease which only a spiritual experience can conquer." Several group members met with the Indianapolis Intergroup, and the We Agnostics group was relisted. They agreed that an adapted version of the 12 steps would not be read at the meeting. Despite this, the group was officially kicked out for a second time on the 8th of May 2011. This time no reason was given. Group members were not contacted. They were not told in advance that the issue was on the intergroup agenda, and they were not told of any allegations against them. They were not provided with any opportunity to offer any kind of defence. They were informed of the intergroup's decision to delist them by a third party. On October 13, 2011, the Indianapolis Service Committee met in a special meeting and voted for a second time to relist We Agnostics. The Des Moines Broad Highway Group. This group was founded on the 12th of October 2010. The group asked for listing immediately. 6 years later, On November 13, 2016, the group was finally included in the intergroup listing. Case 5. Denver Freethinkers in AA Group. This was the first secular meeting of Freethinkers in AA in Denver, Colorado, and it was held on the 2nd of October 2013, with 8 people in attendance. 2 weeks later, there were 12 members. After several months of meetings, each one attracting 15 to 20 members, it was decided that 2 weekly meetings would be needed. So in July 2014, the Freethinkers in AA Group became a weekly Monday 6:30 p.m. and Saturday 9:30 a.m. meeting. This group, its listing not yet been approved, contacted the Denver Central Service Manager to request that a print and online listing be made. As far as I know, no such listing has yet been made by the group. Laytonville Freethinkers Group. It took 3 years after the first meeting for this group to be listed. In April 2013, one of the members approached the intergroup at a meeting and asked to be listed in the local directory. Not until October 2016 did the group get listed. Case 7. Vancouver We Agnostics and Sober Agnostics Groups. The We Agnostics Group was initially set up and asked for listing with the Greater Vancouver Intergroup Society in July 2012. A year later, a member of We Agnostics wished to set up another meeting, calling this one Sober Agnostics. It was set up and asked for listing on the 17th of May 2013. Listings for both these groups were not resolved until March 21, 2017. Case 8. Kingston, Ontario. The Broader Path group there was delisted by District 13 in 2015. The reason being given was that the group had listed itself as secular. The delisting removed the Broader Path group from the District 36 website, telephone answering service and meeting list. I do not know at this time whether this issue has been resolved. In regards to my own group, both my home group and the second group which I co-founded here in Canberra, the first meeting, Quad A, was set up on the 8th of June 2015. This meeting was listed immediately with our Area B and put on the local listings and onto their website. It was also requested for a listing on the AA Australia National website. That listing took 4 months and multiple phone calls and email inquiries and application forms before it was finally done. So it doesn't seem untypical of the experience that my group had of agnostic and atheist groups in AA. So what are we going to do? What are some of the solutions we can offer? It was clear that Bill was attempting to make amends for his previous actions in his writings in the Grapevine in 1961 with The Dilemma of No Faith. I feel it's beholden on me to accept that amends, and I can do that in 2 ways. The first of which is I can help him broaden the pathway by being present in traditional AA meetings, being out in those meetings and identifying as an atheist. The second of these is to continue to broaden the highway by opening more and promoting more non-religious or secular, if you will, AA meetings. We owe it to Bill. Thanks for listening. You can now follow us on Twitter at WeAgnosticsPod or email us at weagnosticspod@gmail.com. And we also have a secret Facebook group. Email me for the details. Thank you for listening to the We Agnostics podcast. Remember, stay sober, go to meetings, and take care of yourself and others.